Great. So we are now live. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm just waiting for everyone to finish filtering in, but thank you so much for joining us. 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, at least Brisbane time, because I realize we're actually joining from across the globe. So yeah, I think it's morning in the UK, is it?
Yep, 9 a.m. here.
Nice. Excellent. All right, thanks everyone for joining. Just wait a couple more minutes so everyone can finish filtering in and we'll get started. Great. Wonderful. Well, I think everyone has pretty much filtered in and is starting to join us. So I'll get started. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the true custodians of this land on which I'm currently presenting from, which is the Turrbal and Yagara people here in Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging and recognise those First Nations people who might be joining us tonight. As we are gathering from many areas of Australia and also across the globe, I encourage you to reflect on the traditional owners on the land on which you are joining us from today. My name is Caitlin Boucher. I'm the Community Manager for Spring Queensland, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. I think potentially all of us are in some form of lockdown tonight, so we're all joining from home. So I'm going to hope that my beautiful dog that is currently beside me on the floor isn't going to bark, and we'll see if we can get through this. An hour of him not needing to go outside or bark at anyone. But we're very lucky tonight to be speaking to some exciting representatives from an internationally acclaimed circus ensemble, which is Circa, based here in Brisbane, and the Academy Award-winning studio Aardman tonight, who are based in Bristol. Our panellists tonight include Aardman's Ngaio Harding-Hill, Head of Attractions and Live Experiences, and Merlin Crossingham, Creative Director, and they're both joining us live from Bristol, I believe. You're both based in Bristol?
Yeah.
Excellent. And we've got Circa's Shaun, the Executive Director of Circa, and Tim, I didn't ask how to pronounce your last name. I'm going to say go
Broughton.
Broughton.
Broughton, correct, yes.
Head of Marketing, and they're both based in Brisbane. So we're here tonight to talk about the collaboration between Aardman and Circa for the Shaun the Sheep live circus show, which Spring Queensland is proud to support. You'll all have the opportunities to ask questions. So we're going to leave questions to the end of the session. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A function rather than the chat function. Sometimes the chat function gets a bit overloaded, and the Q&A function is just how we keep track of those questions. Before we get into questions though, I'd really like everybody to kind of go around the Zoom and introduce themselves. So I'm going to go via my personal Brady Bunch collection so I can kind of keep track of you all. But Shaun, you are first.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for having us and for hosting tonight. So I'm the Executive Director at Circa, and my role on Shaun the Sheep Circus Show has been as producer. My background, I guess, for most of my career, I've worked in executive management roles in creative industries. So I've been general manager for music and events businesses. And then about 10 years ago, I moved into commercial theatre, working primarily on large musicals. So I GM'd companies that produced Jersey Boys, Rock of Ages, and then worked across production for Les Miserables, Singing in the Rain, The Addams Family. And then about six years ago, I think I left that world to go into the world of subsidised theatre and ran a contemporary dance company in Adelaide as executive director, and came to Circa about 2.5 years ago. So my background and experience kind of lives across finance, legal, compliance, marketing, all of those elements in fun, creative businesses.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. Ngaio, you are next.
Hi, so I head up Aardman's Attractions and Live Experiences, which is our portfolio that stretches from around the globe to attractions, live experiences, exhibitions, and of course stage shows. I've been at Aardman for many years, starting in the kind of development side and then moving across to this area of business around 7 years ago.
Wonderful. Thank you. Merlin, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I am creative director of Wallace and Gromit, specifically at Aardman. I have worked at Aardman for something like, give or take the odd month, about 24 years. I started as a runner, making the tea and sweeping the floor, and with the aim of becoming a character animator, which I did. I was a lead animator on our first feature film Chicken Run, and that kind of was my thing, and performing, but via animated stop motion puppets. And then I was given the opportunity to start directing by Nick Park with Wallace and Gromit, around Wallace and Gromit Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And my animation roles diminished and my directing roles increased. And over time, I just became a director rather than an animator. And I love the challenge of it. It's always difficult, and that's what keeps it fun. And in 2009, I think it was, I became creative director of Wallace and Gromit, and so I look after everything we do with Wallace and Gromit. Whether we've been able to do stamps, and we've had a 50p piece with Wallace and Gromit on hot air balloons, live shows, but of course animation as well as at its heart. And I work with Ngaio across all of our kind of studio's portfolio characters, whether that's Morph or Shaun the Sheep, as well, just to help amazing events like this come to life.
Wonderful. And Tim, you're lucky last.
Hello, I am Tim Broughton. I am a relatively new head of marketing for Circa, despite the accent. I'm here in Brisbane, just to throw you off the trace. Most of my career I've spent in publishing, working for HarperCollins and Penguin. I was formerly marketing director at Penguin, and I've worked on books from Jamie Oliver, Stephen Fry, Usain Bolt, Justin Bieber. I've worked with Carnival on Downton Abbey, which is perhaps kind of a most similar project to this in terms of a kind of a television tie-in and crossover. I've been with Circa since November, and my responsibilities are across the board really for the company, in terms of marketing requirements. So developing the Circa brand, audience growth and development, and then also working on individual shows, of which Shaun the Sheep Circus show has been a huge debut this spring in the UK, autumn here.
Wonderful. Well, you obviously all bring an incredible wealth of experience and knowledge to this question and answer session. And I'd encourage everybody to ask your questions at any time. And I'll get to them just at the end of the question and answer session from myself. But I'd really like to start right at the beginning. So this is for Shaun, Ngaio, and Merlin. How did the idea of the Shaun the Sheep Circus show come about?
Ngaio, do you want to? I think this probably starts before Circa, because Aardman really had the idea about wanting to create a show with Circus before we were even connected. So
yeah,
where did the start for Aardman?
Circus performance has been something that we've kind of had an appetite for working on with the Shaun the Sheep brand, because its physicality connects so strongly with the slapstick kind of sense of humour and physical performance in the show. And we've worked on a number of stage shows kind of globally, in the UK, Middle East, and across China. And really felt that the kind of progression from that experience was to kind of look at an opportunity for working within the medium of circus. As a non-dialogue show, it has the kind of challenge that the performance is innately very physical, and so the storytelling and the communication comes from performance. If you're dealing with kind of mass performances, obviously you lose a lot of that ability to kind of communicate. So circus offered a kind of freedom that we hadn't had in other theatrical mediums before, and that led us to start talking. Really, was Shaun approached us originally.
Yeah, which I think kind of stretches back to about 2 years ago in Bristol. So I ventured over to Bristol and met with Ngaio, and I guess talked a little bit about the things that we could do and the things that we couldn't do. You know, we do know our strengths, and Circus does have limitations. Part of that being kind of detailed narrative, complex narrative is difficult to convey without language in a circus context. Also, the big thing, a lot of shows that are sort of children and family shows that are based on existing characters are masks or suit type characters. And that takes away our biggest strength, which is our acrobats standing on each other and doing just really feats of incredible sort of physical ability. So we couldn't do that type of show, but what we can do, I think, and what we proposed to Aardman and Ngaio was that we could do something that really plays off the slapstick elements, uses our physicality as a medium to communicate story, and potentially create something that was complex and far broader than just a children's show. That was one of our goals from the start. I think then we had Aardman and some of Ngaio's team come over to see a show, one of our shows in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I travelled across with Rich Webber, who's one of the kind of directors, animators, and actually the voice of Shirley in the show, and Sam Morrison, one of the writers that we work with a lot on Shaun the Sheep. And I think what really impressed us was that the kind of the stripped back physicality. And I think, you know, to Shaun's point about being able to kind of tell stories almost in the same way that we do with our puppets, you know, that the physical kind of body was telling a story in a very similar way to the kind of the stop motion puppets that we use. And that felt like a real kind of strong connection. And the kind of awesome impact that circus performance has within the live spectrum as well was something that really kind of resonated with all three of us, and it felt like a big positive kind of connection.
Great. Now, obviously, you are based in different time zones, and you're obviously two separate companies that are kind of coming together to pull this incredible live show off. You've got animation, you've got circus tricks. What was like, you know, obviously after the meeting and after deciding that you wanted to put this circus show together, what was the first step? Like, what came first? This might be best place for you, Shaun.
So from that day in Amsterdam, actually it was really funny, that performance, because Rich, and I'd watched a lot of Shaun the Sheep to that point, but Rich was sitting in front of me, and every time he laughed at the show, it was like sitting next to Shirley, because it's the same voice. It was great. So from not long after that, Jeroen Lifshitz, our Circus artistic director and the director of the show, went to Bristol and worked with Ngaio and Rich, and I think there might have been a couple of other members of the team.
Sam,
there
the writer, was there as well.
Sam was there that day as well, and had a big kind of day of pulling apart and coming up with creative concepts and story. I dialed in from Brisbane, and it was I feel like it started about 8 p.m. my time and went into 2 a.m. my time or something like that. It was a full day Bristol experience. So we came out of that day or that period with a narrative that everyone was pretty happy with at the time. But when we went away and started to think about it and started to workshop how that might be conveyed physically, it became clear that it was probably too complex and detailed to be effectively communicated. And Jeroen then sort of took it away, sat with a number of our creative team, so a number of our associate directors, to work out how to play to our strengths and come up with something that was going to be more authentic and believable from the circus side of things. And it came up with the story essentially that was almost what we ended up making, and presented that idea back to Aardman. And I think Ngaio and the team really felt that there was a connection with it and that it would work.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was a really kind of quite a new and interesting way of working. It in lots of ways, it went against the instincts of how we normally kind of create our shows, where we will kind of start with the story and the script and then kind of cast to that and kind of build onwards. And it felt like a complete reverse of that process, that although we did start with this kind of central idea, a lot of the actual story was developed through the kind of the performance and the workshopping, which we weren't directly involved with, and we were then kind of delivered a script almost at the end of the development process rather than at the beginning. So it was a kind of a fascinating experience and quite a different one in terms of developing shows.
Yeah, and I guess
Yeah.
that kind of like segues really well into a bit of a deep dive that I want to do into your development process. So I was really lucky enough to see the Circus show. It was incredible, and I noticed that it reflects a lot of the structure of a traditional Shaun the Sheep episode. And this might be for you, Shaun and Ngaio. You mentioned Sam, the writer. Did you have a writer actually like working on the live show to develop a narrative?
I think that was the difference for us, that we didn't actually, because of your processes, and it kind of, without any disrespect to Sam, it kind of wasn't needed. I mean, obviously Sam was involved in that initial workshopping, and actually, it wasn't a simple process to get to that kind of core idea. There was a lot of work that went into that, but then once we'd got to that kind of strong point, we really kind of had the confidence to hand it over to Circa to then kind of work through. I think COVID was a benefit to a great extent, and also the fact that we're a brand that's been around for kind of 25 years. There's 15 years of Shaun series content, so I think the guys had the lockdown kind of COVID opportunity to really get under the skin of the show. And in fact, I think some of the conversations we had were quite challenging for us, because you were much closer to every episode at the time than we were. We had to kind of go away and kind of review and come back with your answers.
Yeah, I think Tim might know the stat actually of the amount of hours, the number of hours and episodes that everyone watched, but it was a lot, and it was right. Like we ended up, so a year ago this time we had a team in Paris who came back from Paris when COVID hit, and everyone was in Brisbane essentially continuing to work, but having the capacity to really dive deep into who these characters are and what makes them tick, and unpick that element of it. And I think by getting in quite deep, in particular, there's 2 or 3 members, along with Yaron, of our associate direction team, who were then able to unpick sort of the 2-act scenario and what that looks like. The first act being, without giving too much away, the first act being kind of a series of short episodes or narratives that you're right, do kind of almost reflect mini episodes that would happen within the TV series. And then the catastrophe that happens at the end of Act 1 that gives us license in Act 2 to go into kind of full circus mode. And we get that because we set up the characterization in Act 1. But I think the complicated part for us was actually not some of the physical elements of what acrobats can do, but more the characterization, like really getting into understanding how we are going to portray these individual personalities that people know and love so well. So there is story, but it's developed in quite a different way to a film or a TV series where you're writing a script. As Ngaio says, it probably happens in reverse, that the physical elements are created and then the story comes afterwards.
I think the level of research was so evident in the performances that your acrobats achieved, and the character, the nuances of our characters really came across in their performances.
I can absolutely agree with the farmer and the nuances of his performance versus the animated show. Obviously the show is aimed at kids, and it's a live show that's kind of like a lot longer than a single Shaun the Sheep episode. So was there a process, like a conscious process, to developing a show that was that long that actually kept kids engaged and kept them kind of coming along for the journey with you?
Yeah, I think so. And it wasn't always as long as it so it was always going to be longer than a TV episode. But when you look at the feature films are far longer than the TV episodes. And the feature films essentially are longer than some live action children's shows. Our big challenge that we had was that we wanted to create a show that wasn't just for kids. We were really adamant about that, trying to find something that would be entertaining for parents and adults of all ages. And teenagers, I think, in particular, who can be, one of the quotes from a review in Brisbane was that, even your tech addicted teenager will love this show. And that was a huge tick of success for us, because that was one of the things we did aim to do. The challenge with that was you've got to have enough of an arc that a 3 or 4 year old or 5 year old can follow. And we, I think, achieved that through using the visual mechanism of a very large video billboard, which is 5 meters wide, and then interlacing that with, I guess we'll get to it a little bit later, but animation, live action, and a few other elements that really helped move the narrative and connect people to the story without just the live action. We cheat a little bit by having 2 or 3 layers of storytelling built in together.
Right. But also, just to add that in filmmaking, if someone's got to get from A to B, we can cut out the bit in the middle. We can start an action and finish an action. But on the stage, you don't have that. You have just the one shot, if in my language, if you like, looking at the stage. And so you have to get a performer from one side of the stage to the other. And that takes time. And it's done in a beautifully playful way, but it's just something in making a Shaun film or TV episode, we would cut out those bits and just take the same amount of story, and you can condense things down. And I think actually that what this did is it gave it a pace and a feeling that was really, really joyful to watch, because you sometimes you miss that when you cut those details out, that's actually a moment for character, and on the stage you can add character rather than strip it back. And I think that, you know, that became a strength rather than a weakness.
And that was always one of the really kind of strong pluses for us in working with Circa when Shaun and Yaron were first pitching the idea, was that real appetite and ambition to integrate the kind of animation and cinematic kind of elements into the show and really reflect the kind of filmic world that Shaun comes from, and make sure that that was kind of translated onto the stage. And I think they've done it in a phenomenally original and successful way.
I think that segues quite nicely into a couple of the challenges early on in the marketing campaign, in that there were so many elements to the show. There are so many elements, and it is incredibly original, that how we communicate exactly what the show is to an audience. Everyone has their preconceptions about Shaun the Sheep. They know what the Shaun the Sheep TV show is, and they know what the movies are. Certainly the Circa audience knows what a circus performance is, and there's quite a big gap between the two. So that was definitely an early challenge in terms of attracting the core Shaun the Sheep audience. And then I think also, I don't think you'll mind me saying this, Ngaio, but you generally stay away from portraying Shaun in the real world in a marketing context. And of course, we have real world acrobats that are doing things in front of you, flesh and blood right in front of you, smashing into each other on stage. So that was another challenge as well, in kind of communicating exactly what the show was.
Yeah, that is always a kind of a marketing challenge within this area of Aardman's kind of business, because, you know, essentially it is you're bringing kind of our characters into the world and you're getting real people to interact with them. So yeah, it's a baptism of fire for you, Tim, I think, isn't it?
As soon as we were up and running and rehearsals had started, then of course we could start filming, and we could really get across exactly what it was, and we could steer away from that general assumption that it would be a costume show, like a general family show that you'd expect to see on stage. And then of course we had some great behind the scenes footage as well, building the show, and how the show came about, the costumes, the set, and we're able to be more specific. But it was almost in those early stages that the originality of the show was, for me anyway, a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I'd really like to ask a question about one of the sequences in the live show. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there is a sequence that involves a paper plane. Now that's a really incredible sequence that involves animation on a screen and also obviously the live performance. This might be a question for you, Shaun, but how did the animation team and the circus team kind of work together to ensure that that kind of came together so seamlessly?
Yeah, look, so, I mean, that's a really good question, and I won't give away too much, but the big one was, I guess, when we talk about the animation team, so we recognized early on that we were going to have some animation challenges if we were going to use animation. We were not going to be able to create new animation in the world of Aardman, because they are geniuses at what they do, and we didn't have the time nor the money to be able to go down a claymation path and create new animation in that space. So we worked with a team of Brisbane animators who created a kind of a world of animation that helped progress the story without necessarily trying to replicate the Aardman animation. The paper plane scene is one of those scenes in the first act, and to kind of be quite open and simple, we use a system called QLab, which essentially allows us to layer video, lighting, and sound cues together, and then they are essentially delivered at the click of a button, so that when the actual physical plane goes behind the screen, it's a click of a button, and then that animation starts. Much like pressing play on a particular playlist, like it'll be a number of different elements that progress, and that's how the animation will tie into the live action. It's got to be timed well, because someone has to press a button, but it doesn't have to be physically, the acrobats don't have to deliver it within X% of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was a really incredible sequence to kind of watch, and I truly wouldn't have guessed that it was just someone like watching really closely to know when to press the button. So, and again, I don't want to sell too much of your secret sauce, but there is some live filming that happens on stage as part of the show. How did you choreograph that between the circus performance and the people doing the live filming, or were they circus performers? If you could.
They were, yeah, they were, and this actually goes a little bit probably back to COVID too, and even before. It's something we've been playing with for a while. So our acrobats playing with live film within our studio. A number of the acrobats are quite skilled photographers. There's a passion that they've developed over time, and videographers, and so. We have done a little bit of it already in studio, just in exploration, and it made a lot of sense to integrate that and use the screen in a different medium in the second act, where we do have live action. As far as how the whole structure was directed, that primarily came from Euron and the story team, as far as the direction goes, and then was stitched together really well with our video director, who's Craig Wilkinson. But the actual skills of using the camera work and the filming, that is all the acrobats, and comes with practice and experimentation, which I guess is what most of Circus is. How they learn most things. I said early on, I think that there's our set is a 5.5 meter high wall, and Tim and I were there on one of the early days where the acrobats started jumping off it and sliding down it, and terrified. I climbed to the top and was scared to look over the top, and I said, how do you know that you can slide down a wall? And the answer was, you don't until you do it. And that's basically what they do. Circus artists have just a bravery to experiment and try new things that you can't even imagine.
That sounds incredibly liberating, and it's actually a really, really kind of great point that your set is uniquely curved, so you can slide down it. Where did that idea come from?
That was Dan Potra, our scenic designer, and it's something that's very clever, and the inversion of scale allows us to convey depth. I think his inspiration really was kind of, again, watching what the world Aardman has created, and looking at the rolling hills and the depth that's created within the TV series and the film, and trying to recreate that in a way that worked for the theatre environment. The extra plus that we got out of it was that he built it into a way that becomes a circus apparatus. People, they slide down it, they do climb up it, they do great things in that way as well.
It was so successful in creating that sense of expanse, and that sense of the flock just frolicking in the field when you kind of see them off in the distance. It's ingenious.
And Ngaio, I'd like to stick with you actually. So how closely did the two teams actually work together on the set pieces and the costumes as well to create that real Shaun the Sheep universe?
Very closely. I mean, we've kind of had a consistent kind of communication, even though we're working on the other side of the world, across the whole kind of process. You know, fair play to Shaun and Tim, who have given up endless kind of Friday evenings to make sure that we stay fully connected. So yeah, and you know, obviously the beauty of kind of email, and so yeah, it was a really fluid, really kind of collaborative process throughout. I mean, quite early on when Libby started to share her costume designs, the team here got very excited about the kind of the ingenuity and the kind of the hipness that she brought to the designs, which is really appealing to us, as well as the kind of nod to that kind of classic circus, kind of vintage circus kind of world, which was really appealing as well. Dan's set was just a huge kind of thumbs up from the first time we saw his initial designs, and similarly kind of working with Craig and their team, they were just so kind of responsive and you know, kind of it was a kind of a seamless process in lots of ways. You know, you would kind of send a set of notes and they would respond kind of perfectly to them. So yeah, it was a collaborative throughout.
Wonderful. It was just a really wonderful kind of show to watch, and in terms of, you know, the characters, like I said before, you know, you still get a real sense of the nuance of the characters that, like, in the live show versus, you know, the animated show. They're very, you know, obviously they're wearing costumes, you know who you're watching just from the movement and the way that they're expressing themselves. Merlin, I'd really love to know, you know, from your perspective, like, how did you develop the characters and the storylines without the help of dialogue? Because you actually don't have a lot of dialogue in the live show, and you're just using movement and action really to kind of express that. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I wasn't part of the rehearsals with Circa, but certainly with Shaun the sheep are all pretty much the same shape, and they pretty much have a body language themselves, which comes from essentially the nuts and bolts of silent performance that has had its roots in cinema and mime, and going all the way back as far as you can go, really. There's always been some form of non-verbal performance going on. And at Aardman, a lot of our main characters are either non-verbal or speak in a way that isn't a real language, you know, that doesn't use traditional language structure. So we're quite at home telling stories with our physicality and our body language and our expressions, and I think that is one of the main reasons why this Shaun the Sheep world managed to kind of segue so perfectly into the show which we have now, because that's where Shaun the Sheep lives. And we do tell, you know, that they always have they always have an internal dialogue. It's not that they're not trying to express themselves, far from it. You know, they are very expressive characters, and I hope, you know, that you always know what they're thinking, and when we're talking about them, you'd say, oh, Shaun would say, or Shaun would do, and so we think of them as characters that actually do kind of speak. It's just that they're not speaking words, they're speaking with how they present themselves to the audience. And I think that the cast, as was discussed earlier, have really got under the skin of it, and for those who've seen the show, or for those who are going to see the show, it's the thing that holds it together. You just are with the characters, and not only in animation but on stage. That is the hardest thing to do. That is the hardest thing to do, and most satisfying when you get it right.
I think from that first time that Rich, Sam and I saw the Circa performers in Humans in Amsterdam, I think it's the closest I've ever seen humans replicate puppets and vice versa. You know, that kind of, there was just such a kind of synergy there between the kind of amazing physical performance of acrobats and how kind of malleable they are and how fluidly they move replicates the kind of way that we work with our puppets when animating them. And it's kind of, yeah, it's quite
that's
unique.
a very good point. In animation, we don't represent the real world at all. You might have noticed, and it's you know, we push. You don't question it when one of our characters does something that in the real world would be extraordinary. Yet on the stage show, you're seeing real people doing things that are extraordinary, that shouldn't kind of in your normal day-to-day life be possible. And I think that, you know, that's a lovely thing to do, because most humans can't do the things that you see on this show.
Those acrobats can do, yeah.
Yes, absolutely incredible things.
It is a unique experience, I think, when the curtain call comes for a Circus show, in that you do feel that for the entire show you have been rooting for every individual on there, and that you have really sort of tapped into their personality and, you know, the incredible feats that they're pulling off. By the end of it, despite the fact that they haven't said a word, you feel like you have this kind of real allegiance with them, between the audience and the performers. I think it's a unique experience.
You let your breath out as well, don't you? I find watching a circus show, you're always kind of holding your breath in kind of anticipation all the way through. It's just such a palpable level of excitement.
Absolutely. I think there were several moments where I held my breath, just kind of like on the edge of my seat, just watching the show. And Tim, like, from your perspective, like, was there any, like, obviously you've spoken about the challenges in terms of getting people to understand, you know, what this kind of new and unique show was about, but like, how was it from your perspective in terms of, I guess, communicating out exactly like how thrilling the show was as well?
In terms of how thrilling the show was, I think we kind of really lent on our kind of Circa brand. And we were able actually to return to the point around how we were able to get this kind of Shaun's world and our world together. Our original trailer for the show was Shaun and Bits watching, I think it's movie night, the episode is, and we actually project some real Circa footage onto the screen. So that was how we kind of got across that dimensional challenge. But really, I guess from working with a partner like this, you really want them to have a clear brand identity. And after, I don't know, 6 seasons of the TV show and 2 films and a computer game and a clothing range, you know, like, Aardman really know kind of what the brand is of Shaun the Sheep. So in a sense, that's incredibly helpful, kind of on a practical level. Early on, they delivered to us a style guide, which included tons of great images, not only to build some key art to sell the show, but also in an ongoing social media campaign. And those, all of that material was incredibly helpful. And yet at the same time, Ngaio and the team were incredibly open to any suggestions that we had. And so, yeah, in our regular catch-ups, we'd come at every point with kind of key art information, and it was refreshing. I've worked with brands before where they've been really specific and not given much freedom to work outside of what they do naturally day in, day out. So in that sense, it's been a kind of very straightforward project to work on, really.
I think it was really, you know, the fact that you guys had such a clear idea of your target audience as well. I think, you know, you came back, you used our assets and came back with a really kind of bold original identity in the, you know, the kind of poster campaign, for example, that we saw in Brisbane, which was, you know, brilliant. I mean, that's kind of exactly the approach we like to take with kind of partners, that, you know, we have our kind of brand, but really they are there to kind of be adapted and to kind of really represent each opportunity. And I think you created a fantastic kind of visual identity for your marketing campaign that was really fresh and original, and did, you know, the fact that this show is kind of aging up and it isn't, you know, it's kind of stretching beyond that kind of core target audience that the brand has. I think you delivered a really successful campaign that achieves that.
Yeah, and the campaign evolved. Initially, we were using a stack of 3 sheep with Shaun at the top, which was very kind of literal. If you watch Shaun the Sheep, if your children watch the sheep, we're relying a bit on the nagging factor for children, seeing recognizing the early artwork and pulling on the sleeves of their parents. But then I think once that was out there, we were able to go with something slightly more conceptual, something slightly more adult focused, with a bit more humour as well. So it was great that the Aardman guys were open to that evolution of the kind of key art imagery, especially.
We just couldn't get the saying "holy flock" through the brand team, could we?
Oh, the old brand police.
Yeah.
Really, I do remember a conversation with you trying to persuade
We tried.
that young Australian kids had much more kind of adventurous language from the age than they did in the UK. But we still didn't quite get it through the doors.
Well, I realize that we are 40 minutes into this and I have so many questions and I can just keep asking them. But I do want to just ask the audience, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'm really happy to ask them and put my own questions aside, despite having, you know, so many more, because I think it was just such an incredible show. So please take this opportunity to ask a question if you have one. But I would really like to ask Ngaio and Merlin, what's next for Shaun the Sheep?
Well, big news out there is that Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon is nominated for Academy Award, an Oscar. So we have all our hooves crossed that, you know, Pixar goes in as the hot favorite, but, you know, we'd like to think there's a fighting chance for us. So yeah, do keep your eyes out for that. You know, we're an independent studio, and any kind of the big international awards, you know, yes, we have won them before, but it's such a big thing for us, and especially for Shaun the Sheep to have a nomination like that. So we're delighted. But also there's going to be
Christmas
going to the ceremony, Melon.
Pardon?
Who from Aardman will be going to the ceremony?
No one. I think it's virtual this year. Well, it'll be Will Beecher. Yes, it'll be the directors and the producers who are nominated. Rich Phelan and Will Beecher, the directors, and Paul Cooley, the producer. But I believe the ceremony this year will be a virtual ceremony.
This is not the year that you want the nomination.
No, they're gutted. They're totally gutted that they won't be mincing down the red carpet.
But we're currently in the studio at the moment. We've also got Shaun the Sheep Christmas half hour, called Flight Before Christmas, that's in production. So that'll be, for Australian audiences, that'll be on ABC this Christmas. So we've got a lovely seasonal feature. We're also we're going into a Winter Olympics year next year. So we're creating some lovely winter sheep specials as well, which will be a little kind of 1 minute episodes celebrating all the winter sports. And then kind of, you know, beyond that, we'll kind of go into development on Series 7 and perhaps a third feature film down the line. So
Wow.
we never let him rest with Shaun the Sheep.
Hot property at the moment.
That's truly incredible. And I guess just on the live Circus show, which will obviously be, you know, wowing Australian audiences throughout 2021, what are the plans for the future and beyond for the live Circus show?
Yeah, it's obviously we're in a world where plans do change. So you know, our initial plans for the show was that it was to premiere actually last year in Brisbane, and that got pushed to March this year. We were then going to head to the UK pretty quickly. The world has obviously changed significantly. So our plans for the rest of 2021 and into 2022 is that Shaun the Sheep will bounce through Australia over the next kind of 9 to 12 months. What was really interesting for us beyond that larger conversations about different territories was obviously the Shaun the Sheep brand has been to, I think it's, how many territories is it now? Is it
170?
170 territories. Circa's been to 40 countries, and the places that we go quite regularly are places where the brand is very popular. So, you know, Canada, the US, France, Germany, obviously Australia, New Zealand are all places where Circa gets to on a regular basis. So the international interest in this show is significant. And, you know, we've got plans for the UK and Europe in the back half of 2022. And North America was always going to be 2023, but I suspect we might get there a little bit earlier as well. So Shaun the sheep will be here locally for a little bit longer, and then we'll jet around the globe when the world opens up again.
That is absolutely incredible. And I highly recommend, once we can go back, that you can see it, because even myself and my nieces had an incredible time.
Yeah. And sorry, we open in Melbourne in, I'm going to say it's 2 weeks from today, which is very exciting. So looking forward to taking it to Melbourne at the Regent Theatre in a couple of weeks.
Wonderful. We've just got a question here from Beth Keane and Michael Mantelis. So they've just asked, what was your approach to sound? They've said from memory there was a few sound effects in the show, and obviously that's a big part of the appeal on screen. So how did the team approach this for the stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jethro Woodward is our composer. And he created an original score for the show. What we were able to do, though, was actually able to integrate and utilize a range of the sound effects and assets from Aardman. So we had full access to the sound catalog, which is why the squeaks and the squawks and everything else sound as original as they are, because they were created by Aardman. But Jethro did a really amazing job in integrating that through the score itself. And the composition of the score actually obviously has a lot of references to not just the Shaun the Sheep world, with references to the theme song, etc. But I think kind of plays very well into the stylistic, sort of feel of the show, of the TV series as well. Like you could feel like they were composed by the same person. I think he's taken all of that on board.
Wow. And just throwing to another question. So you mentioned at the start of the Q&A that you went to Bristol 2 years ago. So is that how long the Circus show was in development for? Was it about 2 years, or was it a bit longer before you approached Aardman with the idea?
No, it was about 2 years. Yeah, maybe a shade before that we started conversations internally, but the development of the show really didn't kind of go into full pace until we'd met with Ngaio, which is a couple of years ago now. So, and that's, for a show of this scale, that's actually pretty quick. At the 2 year time frame for a show with as much detail and the size of the physical production and the costuming, it was fast, and particularly fast in the last 3 or 4 months.
Yes. And so how do you move from an animated TV show, where obviously things are a bit fantastical and anything is possible, to, working with people in the real world? Obviously they're still doing incredible feats, but they still have like limitations. How did you move from, doing an animated show to a circus show with those kind of limitations?
I think Merlin touched on it before. The superhuman elements of our acrobats, it make some of that real world to animation world feel less difficult. They can do things that you or I can't, so, which is very often what you see on the screen with Shaun the Sheep, the sheep, in big stacks and kind of climbing all over things. These are things that acrobats can actually do. They can't, normal people can't do them, but our artists can. I think what was probably more of a challenge was which is something unusual for us, was actually the characterization, as I mentioned, that the detailed characterization that we deliver in Shaun the Sheep Circus show is not something that we do in every show. And that was actually something that was probably more difficult than the going from an animated world where everything's possible to a live world. It was actually getting the close, detailed expression of, this is a person, this is Bitzer, or these are the pigs, because the characters are quite human. Like, they're animals, but they're actually quite human. And our artists are not necessarily all experienced in working in that way. So I think they've done a stunning job, but a lot of that was probably more difficult than the physical element, which comes naturally to them.
I think that was one of the kind of elements that we identified, isn't it, when we were kind of developing this? Because I think, you know, going back to that point of, you know, the show being a kind of stop motion kind of puppeted show, I think, you know, that kind of acrobats and puppets, there's only certain things that we can do with our puppets that you can't do with our puppets that perhaps you could do with a drawn animation or a CG animation. So in that sense, they were kind of more aligned in a performance style. But I think it was just taking the experience of your acrobats and putting that level of kind of performance in and characterization. And I mean, they nailed it, but I think that was the bit that we were kind of focused on potentially being the kind of one of the bigger challenges in terms of working together and developing the show.
And there's something about doing something fantastical in animation where it's not actually that fantastic because your audience kind of know that it's animation and anything is possible. But when you see a person doing something like that, you kind of have to double take and think, whoa, did they actually do that? And because we know the limitations of the real world that we live in, and so when you see something like that, it does take it to the next level.
Wonderful.
It's really true.
Well, we don't seem to have any more questions from the audience, so I'll leave it with them. They've got one last chance. We've got a few more minutes left in this session to ask you questions. But if there's no more questions from the audience, I have one last question. And this is really for all of you. So I'll do my little Brady Bunch roundup again. And I would love to know from all of you, you know, are there any lessons that you'd like to share with, you know, budding theatre or circus or animation practitioners about the lessons that you've learned working on the Shaun the Sheep live show? Shaun, you're actually first in my Brady Bunch collection.
So look, I think the key one for us, and so Circa collaborates with a lot of people. We tend to make shows working with other great partners. I think the biggest learning for me was which kind of feeds into how great partner Aardman have been on this project, is great collaborations happen when you push each other. And I feel like we would come to Ngaio with ideas that we would think are going to get laughed out of the room or get, you know, no, we definitely can't do that. And it was really rare that was ever the case. It was actually they were totally up for all of the great kind of zany things we came at them with, which was amazing. And I think what that really did was make it pushed us further. The other thing I think is with working with great partners, what they do is they point out the gaps that you potentially might have because you're too close to something. We understand how Circus works really well. And I think particularly in this second act of this show, some of the feedback that we got from Ngaio's team helped us to connect the dots a little bit more within the circus element of the show, which we just take for granted because it's our world. So I guess the learning is to try and work with partners who push you and bring out the best in you and extend you beyond where you think you might feel comfortable. Because the outcome will be far greater. We've had an incredible time working with Aardman because I feel like they really did help bring some of the things out of Circa that we didn't know we had in us.
Yeah, I think it's kind of following on from that point, really. I think my kind of first instinct was kind of be brave, you know, in that initial kind of when you're kind of embarking on a relationship, you know, kind of really get to know your partner and build that kind of level of trust. And if you can establish that, then, you know, it'll enable you both to kind of stretch yourselves kind of creatively. And, you know, that's why you want to kind of collaborate with people that bring new kind of worlds or new dimensions into your kind of experience. So from a brand point of view, you know, Circa very much did that. You know, it's a very kind of contemporary approach that kind of has pushed us in new ways. And I think if you can start from establishing a trusted relationship, then creatively, it's always going to be a really exciting, successful partnership.
Oh, you're on mute, Caitlin. But
oh my gosh, I did it once. I thought I was going to go through the whole hour. It was because my dog had started growling and I was like throwing him a treat, like, you know, just off screen. But Merlin, do you have any lessons that you'd like to share? Or
just an observation really, and that's to keep your eyes open to new ideas and to be receptive to them, because it's those moments that create the synergy that make something bigger and better than one single thing. And to embrace that, because that's where inspiration and fresh creativity comes from. And I think for Aardman, and it certainly looks like for Circa as well, that kind of lifeblood of creativity is at the heart of what we do. And sometimes when you're deep in your own world, and I'm doing animation and this and that, just seeing something like the Shaun the Sheep show with Circa just makes you go, that's amazing, and just sort of just soak it up. And I think it's very easy just to sort of be in your own little thing. So yeah, remember to look out into the world and be inspired.
And then let the marketers work out how to communicate that.
Yeah.
And sell it.
Well, that's an excellent point, because Tim, you get the last say in what the lessons are. So what did you learn?
Mine would be a general marketing lesson, really, and on a theme, which is, I mean, it's so easy to get absolutely buried in a project when you're working on it day in, day out over a long period of time. So just try and get as many fresh eyes on whatever you're producing as possible. I'm constantly pestering my wife to read copy, family, friends, dads at my kids' kindy I've shown images of this campaign to, and it's those people that just have kind of nothing to do with the project at all, that can see it with fresh eyes, that can really give great advice and also come up with a kind of a freshness. And I suppose coupled to that is then being able to receive that information. So try not to get too wedded to a single idea, and be open to kind of a fresh view and perspective.
You came up with some lovely ideas, like with we've got a Shaun the Sheep attraction at Paradise Country on the Gold Coast, and so Tim came up with the idea of sending the acrobats to the attraction to do real research with real live sheep, and created some really fun short films of the acrobats researching with real sheep.
It's a very, very tongue-in-cheek day with acrobats with clipboards down on all fours and getting their faces licked, and tongue-in-cheek confusing goats with sheep. And that's all on our Facebook page if you want to take a look.
Wonderful. Well, that kind of brings us to the end here. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us tonight from different time zones all around the world, and want to encourage everybody to, if you can, go and see the Shaun the Sheep live circus show. It's a great time. It was just so much fun. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and just thank you so much for providing your time and expertise to answering our questions. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.